Okay, well, hi everybody. My name's Sharon MacArthur, and my company name is MissMenopause. So I think a lot of people think I'm a middle-aged Mr. Man character, of which I can assure you I'm not, but I do answer to anything. But I came up with the name MissMenopause, quite frankly, because the menopause was being missed. So you see what I did there. I think I'm quite clever, but there you go. That's for you to decide. So if you told me nearly 4 years ago I was going to get passionately involved with the menopause, I would have said, don't be ridiculous. That's got nothing to do with me in my life. So I'm not medically trained. I don't pretend or profess to be. But I set up MissMenopause really because of my own lived experience and my personal anger that I didn't understand what on earth was happening to my mind and my body. So approximately 4 or 5 years ago, so I'm 53 years of age now, and I'm postmenopausal. But my menopause magic, as I like to describe it, began when I was 47, nearly 48. Literally had no idea that's what it was at all. And somebody dared to say to me, Sharon, do you not think it could be the menopause? And I have to say, I was absolutely disgusted. I was disgusted. I was like, I'm far too young for that menopause thing. So I'm going to share something that I'm really quite embarrassed about, and I'm really asking for your forgiveness up front, because I'd been a senior leader in a FTSE 100 company, and I thought I was pretty smart and I was streetwise, and I thought I knew a lot of things about a lot of things. I used to be accountable for millions of pounds worth of revenue, for example. And when somebody dared to say it to me about menopause, like I say, I'm going to embarrass myself. If you'd asked me on reflection, what is a menopausal woman like? I would have said, probably hasn't worked for at least 20 years. Is probably at least 70 years old and probably has a mobility aid. So I know that's absolutely shocking, and I am embarrassed to say that. But I was utterly ignorant about the subject. So when I started to do some research, I realised quite quickly that it possibly could be this thing called menopause. And growing up, the only thing that I'd been introduced to about menopause, intellectually, I'd heard of the name menopause. And I knew it was end of fertility. That's what I believed it to be. But whatever it was, wasn't going to be happening to me. I had decided that, whatever it was. So no concept. And the only things, like I say, I'd heard of. So yes, I'd heard of the name. And the only other things as a descriptor would be things like hot flushes. So I'd heard of those. And then the only other thing, the descriptor I've heard of menopause, was my grandma would be talking about all of her friends, like in whispered tones, going through the change. So I used to be quite terrified that I might meet them on a dark night, because I literally had no idea what on earth they were going to be changing into, because nobody told me. Nobody told me. So I started to do lots of reading and kind of started to agree that maybe it could have been this menopause thing that I was going through. But my first symptom was night terrors. And I'd never had terrors before. So why on earth would I have been having night terrors? So I was waking up, it was always 4 o'clock in the morning, feeling like the world was going to end. This horrendous, like, I never want to go back to that feeling. But I had several episodes and I couldn't reconcile why on earth I might be feeling like that, because my boss was lovely, because it was me, because I have another business, which is, was running before this. And there wasn't anything going on in my home life that I could think, why on earth would I be feeling this terrible? And I had several episodes over several months. And then they kind of faded away, which was great, because I didn't, it was a horrible experience. And at no point did I associate that with menopause. Why on earth would I? Because the only thing I'd heard of was hot flushes. And then I had episodes where I'd be waking up through the night. Now, my other half said that was unusual in itself, because he reckons I can sleep through a hurricane. So waking up, first of all, was quite unusual. But then I was waking up and I was really, really hot. Now, I can only say about my girlfriends that I've always been jealous of my sweaty girlfriends. And that's just because if we've gone to the gym, they've probably looked at me, and a couple of them have said in the past, Sharon, are you even trying? It's because I just don't perspire, which is, not great when you're going to the gym. People think you're not working out. But when it comes to the subject of menopause, I'm incredibly, incredibly fortunate, because some women are going to get so hot through hot sweats. You've heard night sweats, day sweats, hot flushes, flashes, whatever. They get so hot they might have to strip their bed sheets through the night, or they might be carrying spare items of clothing around because they get so hot they're having to change. But I'm incredibly fortunate. Remember, I just don't perspire. So I was waking up in the night, getting really hot. So that was the first thing. I was awake. That was unusual. And then I was getting so hot I was running around the bedroom, you know, the covers were off. You know, there was a couple of times I would have put my boobs against the cold window if I'd had half a chance, because I just felt so hot. But remember, they're called sweats. It's always called hot flush night sweats. So I didn't associate that with menopause because I wasn't sweating, I wasn't perspiring. And I think the other really difficult thing for many women encountering menopause, as they start to encounter the term, is perimenopause. Again, I'd never heard of that term, you know, 5 odd years ago. It wasn't a term that was used. Many women like me, maybe you might think that, and I did think this, menopause was a linear process. I thought I'd go to bed one evening and I'd wake up the next day and live happily ever after, never having a period, maybe like a Disney film is probably what I thought. And oh my goodness, for most women, it's not like that at all. And menopause isn't a linear process. It often goes up and down, around and round and back again, you know, not for often for months, but for years. For years, this can happen. So I literally didn't have a clue that that was what was happening to me at all. So I started to do research and thought, maybe it could be this menopause thing. And I guess the other thing again about my story is I am not a parent. So I distinctly remember having a conversation with my nana in her backyard. I think you'd call them yardens now if you were to posh them up. But in her yard when I was about 14, and the conversation must have been along the lines of, oh, Sharon, you know, something about what about your family that you're going to have? And I said, oh, nana, I'm not going to have any children. And her direct response to me was, well, who's going to look after you when you're old? And my response to hers was, nana, I'll be dead when I'm old. Because I thought people who were 50 were really, really old. And I'm 53, so I just have to say, I think it's really, really young now. Now I'm on the wrong side of 50. But yeah, so I knew at the point, it wasn't because I couldn't have children. It was my body, my choice. So I knew all the way, you know, growing up, I wasn't going to suffer from postnatal depression, postpartum psychosis. My point of view never ever changed. And so I guess, and again, in my utter ignorance, I probably thought because I hadn't shaken my hormones up through pregnancy, whatever that menopause thing was, it wasn't going to be happening to me. Of course, it wasn't going to be happening to me. And what I say about menopause is, menopause could have killed me because I fell asleep at the wheel of my car when I was driving at speed from utter exhaustion. Because I had a number of symptoms. Because what I say about menopause is, for me, it's the gift that keeps on giving. Or it certainly was for me, and it is for many, many thousands of now over the years. So, you know, I've said I had night terrors, I had hot sweats. I also had what I can only describe as PMT times a million, where I do ridiculous things, like I'd be watching, you know, adverts for cat food on the television and then burst into tears, like, oh, that's so sad, and think, Sharon, that's totally utterly, you know, ridiculous. What are you doing that for? Then within the next, you know, 60 seconds, I could have easily murdered the nearest human. You know, and that's really disconcerting when you don't feel like you're in control of your own mind and body. You know, and this happened, you know, not just for, you know from month to month or year to year, but sometimes from minute to minute. And so imagine if you're trying to work through what I call this life event called menopause, and you're feeling like you can't even control your own thoughts and feelings. It's really quite frightening. So all of those things were happening. But like I say, the most untenable symptom in the end was my inability to remain asleep. So I could get to sleep, but I couldn't remain asleep. And my other half thought it was being really super helpful because he went and bought me one of these trackers. So then it would tell me every morning, Sharon, you've only had 2 hours sleep, which made me even more anxious. But I literally fell asleep at the wheel of my car. Now, thankfully, I didn't swerve or crash the car, but I don't know if anybody's ever what I call nodded themselves awake. I used to do it on the school bus and bash my head off the window sometimes. But I was so terrified that I thought I couldn't trust myself to drive for longer than half an hour. And at this time I was only working about an hour down the road. So I'd have to pull over after half an hour, have what I call a nana nap and a lay-by somewhere for at least 10 minutes before I could trust myself to drive any further. And I thought, you know what, Sharon, this is just outrageous. The menopause ultimately could kill you, could kill you if you let it. So you're going to have to do something about it. So it took me, what I want any listeners to understand is menopause management for lots of women isn't easy, but it can be done. So it took me effectively 18 months of trial and error to find what I call my personal silver bullet. And like I say, it's not easy. What I say about menopause, each of us will have a menopause like ourselves. It will be completely and utterly unique to each person. And if you could say all Sharons who were born in 1968 with jazzy wallpaper could have a menopause like this and you could manage it like that, well, the world would be fantastic. But guess what? You can't. So unique to you, and every single person is going to have a menopause like themselves. So I would say menopausal women are almost like a live living experiment because it's complete and utter trial and error as to what might work for you against what might work for me. And so this is what happens. It's we're almost trading, I guess, secrets with each other, us menopausal women, because I'll get really super enthusiastic and say, oh, you know, I use this, or I've tried this and it worked for me. And then other people hear my story and go, right, I'm going to do that. And come back and say, but it didn't work for me at all. And that's what makes it incredibly difficult. So when my menopause began roughly about 5 years ago, I went and did a bit of Dr. Google. Now, who doesn't love a bit of Dr. Google? So there I was on Dr. Google. Dr. Google said at the time, Sharon, you want to try some sage leaf tablets? So I was like, right, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to have some sage leaf tablets. So me being me, I didn't go my little pot, oh no, big, huge pot of sage leaf tablets, because I'm so convinced this was the thing. And the only thing that I could tell you after 2 weeks of taking these sage leaf was all I felt was sick, because all I could taste was sage and onion stuffing. It was vile. It was horrible. And so the next thing I tried some vitamins and minerals. So vitamin D, which I still take now. And then because I wasn't really sleeping, magnesium I read was this wonder thing. So I was bathing in it, bath salts. I was eating it, magnesium tablets, and then you can get it in spray. I was spraying it all over. And it worked a little bit, but it wasn't that effective, to be honest. So then I decided I would go down to see my GP. Now, at the time, I was utterly ignorant as to what the GP might say. So when they offered me antidepressants, I just took them because I believed I was getting the right and the best advice that I could possibly be getting. I now understand that is not appropriate for most women. Most women should be offered HRT if they want to go down what I call the medical route as the first line of treatment for menopause. But here I go, and I just took what I was given because I trusted my GP, like most of us do. And after a couple of weeks, a couple of months, I did have some reduced effects. I wasn't getting as hot. I was slightly less tired, but it wasn't really effective at all. So in the absolute end, I went back to my GP because I was doing lots and lots of research for myself, because at this point, MissMenopause wasn't in existence. And I marched back to the GP and I said, I want HRT and I want some now. Please give it to me. And because of the way I had managed my appointment, there was really no way they could ever actually refuse me to get my HRT. So I got my HRT, and within 2 weeks of getting my HRT, I'm incredibly lucky. All of my symptoms went. Because another symptom that I had is I thought that at the age of nearly 50, that you couldn't sleep through the night because maybe that I believe, because I think a lot of women do this as well, and maybe a lot of men do too. We tell ourselves stories that this just what getting older must incur. So I was like, well, Sharon, you can't sleep through the night now without having to get up to go to the bathroom. So maybe it's because you're old and your bladder must shrink to the size of a pea. So that's the story that I told myself, and just thought, well, I'm resigned to the fact this is my life now forever and ever. Within 2 weeks, all of my symptoms disappeared because it was hormone related. And I literally had no idea. And that's a really quite common thing. So the message I would like people to take away, whether you are a female listening to this call, or whether you're a friend, family, or colleague, is this. And this is the key question. Is the menopause impacting the quality of your life? And if it's a yes, then my message to you is doing nothing shouldn't be an option. That is the message. Because statistically, when I ask that question to most women, 8 out of 10 statistically women are going to respond saying, is the menopause impact the quality of your life? 8 out of 10 of them are going to go, yeah, it's not great. It's estimated 1 in 4 of that 80% are going to go really, really awful. And my next question is always, what are you doing about that? Guess what most of them say? I know you're guessing correctly. Correct. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. So my message is, I don't want to hear of any other women choosing to be what I'm saying, a victim of the menopause. And whilst I'm not saying it's easy, I'm certainly not saying it's going to be easy for some people out there. It may take you several months. It took me 18 months, remember, of trial and error to find a solution. But a bit like the advert I say, did you know it's because you're worth it? You're worth it. And so doing nothing shouldn't be an option, because I find that utterly heartbreaking that a lot of women, and I'm sure it's nobody on this call today who's maybe listening back, but I'll just say a theme, and most of the women I've met over the years are notoriously rubbish at caring for themselves. Just saying. And we know statistically, don't we, that women are having children later in life, so they're maybe looking after younger families. We know that they may be looking after older parents. And so certainly in the last 18 months, who hasn't helped to try and look after more humans than they've ever probably done before? And I find that women are pretty rubbish at caring for themselves. So when menopause begins for lots of people, it's often not bad enough to keep them away from work. So they're rocking up to the workplace, feeling a bit, I'm going to be very technical here, feeling a bit meh, feeling a bit anxious. I put my keys in the kettle. What is going on? I think I've got early onset Alzheimer's is one of the most common things women say to me practically on a daily basis. So women are coming into the workplace, putting 2 and 2 together and often coming up with the answer of 46, and quite quickly telling themselves that, do you know what? I just can't do this work anymore. I can't do the work that I've always done. So do you know what? What that probably means is I'm going to have to leave, because you'll hear women say things like, I've lost my confidence. That is a real common thing that you hear. And so the reason that MissMenopause exists is because I'm just not having that anymore. So many, many women, unlike me, take time off to have their families, quite rightly so. That, absolutely, that's what you should be doing. And so many of them who either need to come back to work or do want to come back to work, their next, the end goal really usually at this point in their lives is retirement. Why shouldn't it be? So you're working to get to the goal, so that's you done, your working career is done. But I found, and I even wrote an article nearly 3 years, it's updating, why do we see less women in senior positions? And I truly believe it's because of this life event called menopause that nobody's told us about, where women wake up one day, usually in their mid-40s onwards, usually, but not always, and start to feel, remember my technical term, a bit meh. And I can't think straight. I feel, I've got achy bones. I've got, itchy skin. I've got brain fog. What's this? It's a thingy. It's a thangy. I can't remember my own name. And so they're telling themselves they can't do the work. So at the very, very least, women are what I would describe as reversing away from opportunities. So you might say to me, Sharon, I think you're really expert in this. And I'm going, no, ask Louise, because I'm terrified. I'm going to forget my own name in a sentence. But at the very, very worst case scenario, women are leaving out of utter ignorance. They are walking away from opportunities, and all of that expertise and talent, in many, many cases, is getting up and leaving out of utter ignorance, because nobody's told us that what might be happening to our minds and our bodies could be menopause related, which is a life event that is going to impact 100% of reproducing females, whether they like it or not. So for any multimillionaires, listening on this call who are thinking, I've got a few spare million, I'd like to go and get out of menopause shop. Guess what? You can't. So coming to a body near you, whether you like it or not. So my mission really is to educate everybody. So some organizations will say to me, because MissMenopause exists, to go into organizations large and small up and down the UK, and talk to everybody about menopause. And I think a lot of maybe male colleagues would say this about menopause. They probably have this idea that we as women just know what this is all about. And the message I have to tell them, because a lot of, still in organizations, a lot of senior people are still men in the workplace. And they're quite surprised that women don't have a clue either. So I'm saying we're all coming from this, which is outrageous, isn't it, the 21st century, that we're all coming from the same level of ignorance still in the 21st century. And some of the most profound feedback I've had has been from men who've often come along unwillingly to sessions that I run, like, oh my, you see them like, oh my goodness, what? Oh, I've got to go and listen to some person, talk about menopause. What's that got to do, with me in my life? But I have to say that I've had most of the men who've come along, and the percentage is much smaller than the women who turn up, but quite rightly so at the minute. But I get a bigger percentage of feedback often from the men. So I've got men who've told me this is the best thing that I've ever done, especially throughout the whole of lockdown. And I've got men who've told me and got in touch with me to say, learning about menopause is probably going to help to save my marriage. And so for me, that's totally profound, because you might think that, I just need to talk to my women of a certain age. And the other thing organisations need to appreciate is, whilst menopause in most cases is going to impact women mid-40s and onwards, technically and statistically, it's estimated up to 1 in 100 females under the age of 45 and under the age of 40 could be going through what's classed as early menopause. And for women under the age of 40, they're given this medical term. Now, I'll listen very carefully. I shall say this only once. It's called POI, and it stands for premature ovarian insufficiency. I can't say I'm a fan of that term particularly, so we'll call it POI. And many, many women are going to encounter early menopause or POI under the age. It's likely because of chemical and medical reasons. So these are individuals who are going to encounter things like hysterectomies, cancer treatments. So you probably would never have imagined, which I never would have imagined, that not only are those individuals, scared, worried, and anxious about those treatments, but some of them literally the day after will be plunged into a full-scale menopause overnight, literally overnight. And so the sad thing is that many women don't even know that might happen. So I met a woman about 3 years ago now, and she was having a hysterectomy. And I thought, well, she was really, really smart. She decided to get all of the literature and read all about what the procedure was all about. So she was going through the literature, and she said she came across, she said she couldn't even call it a paragraph. It was literally like a sentence, and it said menopause. So she thought, what on earth is that all about? So she went back to our medical team and ended up speaking to a surgeon. And his response was this. Now, it could have been anybody, it happened to be a he. He just said, oh, he says, yes, menopause. He went, that's just a couple of hot flushes and you'll be done. This individual was literally overwhelmed, on her knees, overcome with symptoms. And her response was, she thought she was dying. That's what she thought was happening to her. And some of those individuals will have a much rougher ride through menopause, because I'll call it a natural menopause just for the purposes to help people understand. But I'll say I would describe it as a natural menopause, because mine happened over several months and over years. So I had symptoms that lasted over months and years. These individuals are going to be plunged off a cliff overnight into menopause. So you could imagine that feels much more severe to those people. So my mission is to educate everybody. We've got to get away from this idea it's only women of a certain age. And I'm going to be super polite here and say some individual a couple of years ago suggested menopausal women might want to wear a badge. Now, all I would say is that my worst symptom of rage, you would not have wanted to give me something with a pointy end. That would be a very, very bad idea. So menopausal women don't need to wear a badge. We don't want to wear a badge. We're not going to wear a badge. All we need to understand what menopause is all about, because nobody's told us, which is why my service exists. I say my service shouldn't exist. It's outrageous that, I have to tell people about this life event because when nobody's talking about it, nobody's told us. To the point being that all women want is to understand what menopause is. What they want from their employers is to be enabled to work through this life event known as menopause. So that just means small, reasonable adjustments, which should be in effect no cost, low cost, and get out of the other side. That's all we want. And we know we have an aging workforce, and it's estimated that women in their 50 plus is the fastest growing demographic in the workplace. So, we're hearing stories at the moment, aren't we, through Brexit, through COVID, that recruitment and talent and retention is really difficult. So what you don't want to do is lose all of that expertise, all of that knowledge and talent because of ignorance, because that's where we are at the moment. There's a big void of ignorance all around. So from an organizational point of view, what can organizations do? Well, I say, if you did nothing but look at your beautiful policies and procedures that you have now, you'd be in a fairly good place as long as you were educating and understood what the subject matter was all about. So the analogy that I'm going to use is things like pregnancy. So I know that just about all organizations, because of, you know, employment law, etc., will have beautiful policies and procedures around things like pregnancy. So if I was to disclose a pregnancy, you are my line manager, beautiful things would happen in most organizations. I might get a desk ban. I might get a workstation assessment. I might get a car parking space nearer the door. I might get time off for appointments. And what I'm saying is, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. And I think a number of organizations get really quite anxious, like, oh my goodness, I've got to do all this stuff because it's menopause related. What I'm here to say is menopause isn't more or less important than any other initiative that you need to think about when it comes to mental health, well-being, you know, AD&I initiatives. It's equally as important as anything else. What's different is the scale. The scale is different. So what I'll say is the most commonly reported symptom to me is anxiety. So many organizations are going to say to me, look at all this amazing work we're doing about mental health and well-being, and they absolutely are. And they will continue to do that. And I rock up and say, menopause? And they kind of go, what? And I'll say 100% of reproducing females are going to encounter menopause, whether they like it or not. And I don't know about you, but I hope and I wish that the smallest percentage of any population, for example, might suffer from, let's call it, mental ill health. But when it comes to menopause, for the very first time in a woman's life, who might never have suffered from, you know, a change in their mental cognitions or feeling mentally different or mentally unwell, many women are going to say anxiety is one of their number one symptoms. So what I'm saying is we've got to join the dots. So we can't have this silo approach where we're talking about these things here. It comes under one big pot of well-being, you know, and caring for your people. But like I say, it's not more important. The scale is just greater. The scale is greater. Because what I say about menopause, although it might have been happening physically and mentally to me, because I'm a reproducing female, I would say if you'd been in my orbit, whoever you were at my worst symptoms, you would have been, you know, impacted, whether you're a friend, a family member, a colleague. Because what I say about women is we're insidious, we're everywhere, and there's literally no escape. So what I say about menopause education is it can't harm you, but it could certainly really, really help you. So just imagine if somebody discloses a menopause and you then now understand the subject matter, those small reasonable adjustments that hopefully leaders are familiar with, because of things like pregnancy and things like maybe mental health conversations that they've been having over the last, 6, 12, 18 months. It's just part of those conversations. It's not something to be worried of or feared. And what I say to organizations is, do you really need an additional policy? Because policies are only as good as the humans that read them. And what you don't want to get is what I call a leadership eye roll, where managers or in your organization are going, oh, another thing we've got to think about. What I'm saying is, once you understand the subject matter, can you not begin to look at menopause through your current policies through a menopause lens, and just look at everything that you're doing as a process, as a policy, and make sure that it just becomes a menopause friendly event. So if you were talking about health and safety, one of the most ridiculous things that I ever heard wasn't long after I set up my service, and it was long before COVID was even thought about it was a thing. And I was striding through the office going to deliver a session in this organisation, and an individual came running over trying, Sharon, I think I'm going through the menopause. I was like, all right, okay. So I've asked if I can have a fan because I'm getting really, really hot. She said, my line manager, he's checked the policy and he says, I can't have a fan because I'm not pregnant. And I said, all right, okay. She said, so I've asked, can I bring my own fan in? And the answer was no, because it's not PAT tested. So this is why I'm not a fan of policies, because some leaders out there are going to take the letter of the law and read it in a really black and white way and kind of go, if it's on there, you can, if it's not there, you can't. And what I'm saying is, can we bring our humanity to work? So I always say, from a leadership point of view, I don't believe you're paid to know all the answers, but I believe you are certainly paid to listen. Because remember, every single person will have a menopause like themselves. And if your intention is to educate everybody, then most people aren't going to come to line managers with a requirement, because they'll self-manage. They'll self-manage. So, like I say, my mission is to educate everybody. If I can inject some fun and some humor into that, then all being good. But my mission is, you know, I get fantastic feedback when people come to my sessions. But you know what? I'm rather brutal and say, to me, the most precious gift that all of us have is time, because you can't ever buy it back. So if anybody spends any time with me, my mission, and maybe for anyone listening today, is now you've heard some of this information, what do you plan to do with it? What might your next step be? And I'm going to leave it there. So thank you for tuning in, and just think about that. What might your next step be?